After reaching 100, I look back on my progress and I definitely wish I had done a few things differently. So I want to go over every mistake that I made on my way to level 100, and hopefully this will help your process. Starting off with the first one, which is defense. Now, this is something that I didn't focus on until World Tier 3, and I even then didn't really focus on it too hard. Because, well, World Tier 1, World Tier 2, you don't really need a lot of defensive skills, and I still think that that is true. But as soon as you hit World Tier 3, the difficulty jump is quite insane. And if you're dying all the time, well, for one, if you're hardcore, you lose your character. But on softcore, you're going to find that dying a lot, even though it doesn't really have many repercussions, is going to slow you down more than just running a couple defensive aspects. And in fact, your armor doesn't really have any other use besides defensive aspects. So even though, let's say you could replace your armor for higher armor values, it's actually oftentimes better just to run the aspect on it and then maybe only replace it every once in a while. And there's two in particular that are going to be extremely important. The first one is going to be the aspect of disobedience and the aspect of might. Okay, these two, if you just get them on any build, you're going to get way stronger, way quicker. It's going to give you massive amounts of increased armor and damage reduction for just using basic skills and for just attacking, which is going to be super important and allow you to progress a lot quicker. Another thing that I did not do during my leveling process and only started doing once I actually got to level 70 is using gems. Just use gems. Doesn't matter if it's a trash piece of gear. You get so many gems that even when you start to earn flawless, there's no real reason to keep them around in terms of like 4 or 5 additional ones. Just use them. Yes, it looks like we're going to have to save them for the future, but oftentimes, you know, who knows when the data mines are going to come out, and it's not really going to make a difference for like 1 to 2 gems, okay? And on top of that, socket your pieces of gear, okay? When you're going through here, add sockets to gear. It's actually really cheap. And in fact, I just replaced my weapon here, so I'm going to be doing that. And when you reach, I believe it's level 70, you actually unlock the new crafting recipe for royal emeralds here. It says requires level 60, but I've seen some people say that they have not unlocked it to level 70. Let me know in the comment section down below if it's level 60 or 70. I believe it's 70. Another thing that I did not start doing until World Tier 4 is Nightmare Dungeons. Now, I would highly recommend you do Nightmare Dungeons as soon as you really unlock World Tier 3, and assuming you're not like absolutely grinding for like World First, Max Level, etc. And the reason for this is actually not because you're upgrading glyphs, but because of some of your potion upgrades. Some of your potion upgrades require crushed beast bones and various other materials. And actually, one of the best ways I found was just to naturally get them through doing a lot of the nightmare dungeons. Now, there are some spots around the world where you could farm crushed beast bones and some other crafting materials, and those are also pretty good. But actually, getting some of the rare materials, oftentimes you could find them in these nightmare dungeons while also upgrading your glyphs, which of course is another really good way to progress, is just to get a few upgrades. I don't mean grind out nightmare dungeons all the way through, but at least run a few of them. Ideally, you're going to want to run like tier 15 to tier 20, which is, you know, closer to World Tier 4. The lower ones are going to get you far less XP, but just to get like the first few upgrades is really cheap. It only starts to scale once you reach like level 5, level 6. That's when it starts to get a lot of XP. And of course, 6 to 15 is going to take a while. And so I would obviously wait till tier 4 to do those ones, but getting the first few upgrades is really worth it. All stats is extremely important. Now, I don't mean all stats are important. I mean all stats, the stat itself is important. You can see here on my pants, I have plus 21 to all stats, which gives me plus 21 to intelligence, willpower, dexterity, and strength. And this really only matters when you start to get further and further into the Paragon board. So when you start to reach World Tier 4, but as you start to get through some of the Paragon boards, and as you start to unlock them, the requirements for unlocking the bonuses for the rare nodes goes increasingly higher and higher, okay? Up until you reach the last boards, which can be up to like 520, 540 I've seen. You can see here, I'm only just barely reaching the bonuses for some of these nodes. So actually getting a few pieces of gear that actually have all stats can be really nice. Now, I generally prefer on some of my pieces of armor over my weapons, because weapons oftentimes can have a little bit more damage, but overall, just getting the all stats just to push your stats over the edge is going to be really, really important, especially for those of you that haven't done your altars of Lilith. One thing that I really did not do is focus on my secondary weapon as much as I did my primary weapons. And this only kind of applies to your barbarians and your rogues, because oftentimes the other classes don't have your secondary weapon that you're not technically using. The DPS on this weapon does not apply to any of my skills. It only matters for my swords and daggers, right? But the stats on every single piece of gear apply to every single skill. And so while earlier on, I just kind of slapped on an aspect and then moved on from there, I didn't even bother, and I just didn't even look at crossbows, I really should have. And in fact, I even had a bow for a while, and the inherent stat on the bow is distant damage, whereas that doesn't do anything for me, whereas the crossbow is vulnerable damage, which is far better, okay? So I highly recommend anyone that has some sort of piece of weapon or gear or whatever, pay attention to all of them. And if you're a rogue or barbarian especially, make sure you're actually paying attention to every piece of gear rather than just the weapons that you're using. Now, I made a few videos about this, but Helltide zones are something I completely ignored up until like level 75, 80. And I actually recommend that you do it well, at least at level 70, so you can start upgrading your ancestral pieces to rank 5. And the reason for this is you actually get a skill rank break. And what I mean by that is, even if you're not reaching a break point, which a lot of people have said, oh, you just reached the break point, that's not necessarily true. If you're reaching a rank 5 upgrade, you will actually go ahead and break the cap of the rolls here. So for example here, this amulet actually had 2 ranks to imbuement skills, 2 ranks of the malice passives, and less energy cost reduction. And then when I upgraded it to 5, it actually got me +1 to every single stat there, which is huge, okay? And if you do this to every single piece of gear, you start to get massive crit rate bonuses, especially for your amulets, or your rings rather, and your gloves. You're gonna get massive stat bonuses, and you're gonna get massive skill rank bonuses on your gloves, amulets, helmet, etc. And it's something that you should do at least once, all right? Because you need to get to rank 5 at least once. And of course, enchanting and all that stuff. So do a few Helltide zones for sure. My recommendation is try to get in when it first starts, use the map that I showcased in previous videos, and find the 2 mystery chests, loot them, and that's your kind of rotation. Now, because I wasn't farming Helltide zones, not only could I not upgrade to 5, but I also was not rerolling. And the faster you reroll, the more effective in terms of progression, but also the stat and material usage it really is. And I recommend rerolling every piece of gear that you have. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit broke right now, but especially your weapons to get those specific stats, and actually, arguably more importantly, your gloves and your rings for things like crit rate, crit damage, things like that, which are going to be huge in terms of increasing your damage. And this next mistake was actually not something that I guess you could say was my fault necessarily, which was that I had no idea how high the cost scaled when you hit 90. It was like a flip that switched, where it was like, okay, it wasn't that bad, not bad, boom, instantly, like it jumps up 3 times the cost. It kind of came out of nowhere, and there wasn't really any warning in the game that told you so. And so I just want to warn you all here, when you reach level 90, or if you're reaching level 90, or even if you're level 70, you're approaching level 80 or whatever, the costs scale exponentially high, and it's to the point where it cost 40,000 gold in order for me, or 39,3017, to refund a single point of my Paragon board. This is extremely expensive. In fact, if I were to refund every single point that I have, we just do a calculator here, 225 times 39,000. Boom, it cost me 9 million gold, which is extremely expensive. And then in conjunction with that, this skill tree itself is also like an additional 4 million gold. So it cost me about, well, 13 million or so gold in order to respec fully, which is extremely expensive, especially if you weren't expecting that and you were kind of just casually, oh, I'll try my builds later when I max out. Try your builds now, if you can, before you just completely drain your bank, which I actually ended up doing. Now, I know I've said this a lot, and a lot of people have said this, but play in groups. And I don't mean like, okay, just farm in groups and everything. I mean, literally just do everything in groups. This is something that I played solo because I was a rogue. I was like, okay, we're gonna blast. That was kind of our plan as a group. And what I found is if you have friends and Okay, if you're assuming that you're not just playing for fun, because if you're playing for fun, then go ahead and do whatever you wish, and don't worry about it. Just enjoy the story. And heck, you could even play the story as a group. That might be fun as well. But if you're looking to progress quickly, you want to kind of bring up the barbarians, bring up the druids, bring up the sorcerers. If you're a rogue, that is, or vice versa. If you're a druid, you kind of want to tag along to the rogues and see if you could find someone that's going to progress your natural progression quicker, so you can enter world tier 4 quicker. And at that point, if you're able to get people that can actually hold their own in world tier 4 content, you're going to massively increase your progress. The problem we had was that I was so far ahead of everyone because I was a rogue that I was doing, tier 4 and they were still tier 3, and they were slowly going through that process. And if you join a group and you do boost up your fellow players going through the progression, you're going to be able to actually benefit from that as an entirety of a group, because you'll be able to do things like the dungeon farming as a group, renown grinding as a group, etc., etc. Lastly, the last mistake that I made was actually going for full renown. Now, this really depends on what your goal is. My goal was to reach level 100, right? And so going for a renown first actually slowed me down quite significantly. However, I would have had to do renown eventually, so you could look at this as like sort of a temporary mistake. But for those of you that are playing more casually, I do recommend going for the renown, because it's just going to be a nice little power boost and shake things up. But if you're playing more hardcore and you're interested in kind of leveling up quickly, the renown benefits do not outweigh the opportunity cost that you're getting. And I would just recommend going for XP grind, and that's exactly what I did. The only exception to going for full renown is if you have a group of 4 that is able to beat a dungeon that's scaled up to 4, but solo. And what I mean by that is, now Blizzard is looking into this and potentially fixing it, but what you could do is you could split farm. Each person could take a dungeon across the map, and if you all take a dungeon, you all share the renown to each other, and you can actually get through the renown very, very quickly, which is really, really nice. And I do think the altars are something that you should go for, because it doesn't take more than, to me, it took about 30 minutes per zone, which is actually not that bad. And you do get a lot of stats that give you a lot of stats for the Paragon board, which is worth it. But, doing all the side quests that I did, going around and doing a lot of the extra dungeons solo, not worth it. Again, only if you're in a group. A couple of other like little minor mistakes that I made going through that, in my opinion, aren't really super insane, but something you should consider. Again, try to upgrade your potion whenever you can. That's why I suggest doing some of the nightmare dungeons partially, but also just don't forget about it. It's really is quite important, and I did forget about it a lot of times, and I just kept going and kept going. Some of the times I wasn't really swapping out my abilities as I was going through specific pieces of content. If this is someone that, or if you're someone that kind of build a build and you just stick to that build, you could actually be losing out a lot of potential damage on certain fights. Now, there are certain fights that were a little bit more difficult, so I did swap out. But if I did swap out more, I would have been able to go ahead and progress a little bit quicker. And then overall, just grabbing everything that I see. This is something that I drastically regret now that I, made my earlier mistake in terms of changing builds too late. I didn't loot all that often because I was not really concerned with anything, and in fact I just wanted to save the time. And to be fair, it did save me time, but what I'm at now is I have a ton of resources and I don't have a ton of gold because I wasn't really picking up everything. And when I start my new character, I'm gonna have to kind of manage that relatively well, hopefully, to make sure I don't make that mistake again. But hopefully that was helpful, guys. I know that a lot of you are just playing for the enjoyment of the game, and that's totally fine, and that should be done, in my opinion, going ahead and just enjoying the game, especially the first playthrough. The storyline's really good, and I definitely recommend that. But if you're one that wants to progress or you don't care about the storyline, hopefully these mistakes help you. If it did, leave a like on the video. Thanks for watching, guys. The channel has been doing really, really well because of all of you watching, and I just want to thank you again. See you for the next one.